Hi, my name is Martin Williams, and I'm going to demonstrate the Cloud Conveyor decision engine and how it can be used to help select services that meet the requirements of an IT buyer in a cloud market. I'm going to start by explaining the problem that Cloud Conveyor was designed to address. So, the buyers of IT services in a cloud market have a huge range of services to choose from. Finding the right service that meets their requirements is a complex and time-consuming exercise. Cloud Conveyor facilitates the decision-making process to get the buyer quickly to the right answer through focused questions about their requirements. For example, OEMs are under pressure to sell powered by services that are delivered by channel partners. Typically, there is no centralized knowledge of those services and their capabilities, and so sales staff are not kept up to date on partner offerings. This leads to unqualified introductions of customers to partners, ultimately recommending services that do not meet requirements. This lack of centralized knowledge also makes the sales cycle slow, and sales opportunities are often missed. So the decision engine is configured with an IT service architecture that is a definition of IT requirements. And the partners will align their offers against those IT requirements. The decision engine will ask the buyer what their requirements are from a service perspective. For example, are there any regulation constraints? Are there any IT policies? Is there a requirement to have data in certain countries, for example? And once you answer those questions, Cloud Conveyor will then determine what the IT requirements are and then can match those to the partner offerings. So the demo I'm going to show you is going to give an example set of questions that a sales rep might be asked when procuring cloud services, and it's going to be based on two criteria: location and PCI compliance. Now, in this demo, we have configured this such that Verizon Terramark can host services nationally with PCI compliance. Quest will only host services in the west of America, but can do PCI compliance. And Savis hosts services nationally, but only has PCI compliance in the west. So it's just two criteria for selecting these services. So I'm going to go into the decision engine and I'm going to log in. I've already got some questions pre-populated and already answered the questions just to speed things up a little bit. So I'm going to reload those answers in, and I'll take you back through the answers that I've already provided. So if I go back to the beginning, and the first question that's being asked is, what sort of partner do you want? And we've selected that this is going to be a direct channel partner, which we've configured Verizon, Terramark and Savis to be direct channel partners. And we're looking for cloud infrastructure services. This question is about what's important. By answering this question, which is that local data center facilities are required, that will set up so that it asks us questions about those locations. This question here is basically checking in from a technology perspective. It's the options here are really private, public, or hybrid. But the way that we've asked that question here is around the security requirements. We could have actually asked a question before this and asked what is the audience. You know, are you a technical guy? And if it's a technical guy, then we could have asked a more direct question. So we can ask the questions in multiple ways but the resulting IT requirements would be obviously public, private, or hybrid. Where do we want the location? So we've said North America, and I'm now going to select that this is going to have to be in the United States. And so straight away, by selecting the United States, it has said Verizon Terramark. It suggested Verizon Terramark without even asking any questions about PCI compliance or where in the United States. And if we look at our criteria, we've said Verizon Terramark hosts services nationally with PCI compliance. So whether you need it or not, it's got that as an option. The fact that you want it in the US, it's always going to be valid. So the next question is, where in the US do you want that? So I'm going to say that I want my services to be in the West. And by selecting the West, what that actually does is it actually brings all the partners as being valid, and it hasn't asked any questions about PCI compliance. And if I look at the criteria, Verizon still works, obviously. I've selected that I want to be in the West, so this is going to be in the West, and it can do PCI compliance, so Quest has got that capability. And Savis also hosts services nationally and has PCI compliance in the West, so you don't really need to know whether you need PCI compliance or not, because it's available in the West for all three of them. And so if I change my answer from West to Central, then what happens is it goes back to the original Verizon Terramark is valid, but it now asks a different question. It now needs to know, do you want PCI compliance? Because I'm now in Central, and there are some services which obviously do not provide PCI compliance in the Central. So if I say that I want PCI compliance, then that finishes the search. Verizon Terramark is still the answer, and none of the others. So because I'm selecting Central, we can see here that Quest hosts services in the West with PCI compliance, so Central, that's not valid. And Savis doesn't have PCI compliance centrally, it only has it in the West. So you can see there that there are, even just with two simple criteria, it's a little bit of an exercise to try and figure out which services are right. If you can imagine that for hundreds of services with lots of potential requirements that need to be met, the task is a complicated one. And so if we're going to take this to a more realistic example, let's imagine that a channel rep is meeting, say, the Bank of America for procurement, and meeting the procurement guys in Charlotte, North Carolina. The challenge set by the Bank of America is that we need to be able to select partners that can deliver hosted services that need to be hosted in California and in London. There are some security and compliance requirements. There are some minimum service levels, including RPO, RTO, and availability levels. And the service must be auto-scaling with integrated auto-billing. So, let's think about how that would, how these requirements would be addressed. So the typical response would be that the local rep in Charlotte, obviously doesn't know of partners that are offering in California and London. They send the request to a central team for consideration. They realise that some partners have possibilities, but more questions need to be asked to pick the most appropriate service. This communication continues between the central team, the rep, and the client, and then eventually a service is selected. But that whole process could be avoided if we had the information to hand and it was delivered through a decision engine such as Cloud Conveyor. So let's think about some of the selling points of our decision engine. First of all, questions are asked in context with previous answers. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the requirements was that the services need to be in a location, and then it starts asking questions about, okay, well, let's find out which locations is valid for you. Okay, the mapping of the options to those requirements and those requirements to the services means that the questions are focused, and you can actually implement some quite complex logic, but to the user it's an extremely simple process. As these questions are answers, these services are ruled out, and only questions that help to select services that are still possibilities are asked. That was demonstrated with the PCI compliance question. You know, if you said you wanted the service to be in the West, you didn't need to know if PCI compliance was required, because they were all valid. So the result is that the engine can host hundreds of services, questions and requirements, but the questions to the user is minimal.